COVID-19 brought the world to a standstill. Nearly 2 million lives lost. The global economy paralyzed.
We anticipate the worst economic fallout since the Great Depression.
The pandemic is changing the way we live and work. While the virus rages, violent mobs storm the U.S. Capitol, threatening democracy. And in Europe, Brexit ushered in a new era. But a new year and an unprecedented global vaccination campaign are offering hope. What will the year ahead look like for our society and economy? Will the travel and hospitality industry recover? Can technology unite us instead of dividing us further? We convene the biggest names across finance, economics, technology, and public health to create a blueprint for a future that's more resilient, sustainable, and equal. Join us for what's next at the Year Ahead Summit.
Hello, welcome back to the Year Ahead. I'm Mark Miller, Global Editor of Bloomberg Live, and I'm delighted to be your host for the final session of our summit. Over the last 2.5 days, we've been bringing together leading CEOs and global influencers from a range of industries, retail, travel, finance, healthcare, technology, to map out a blueprint for global businesses and their leaders as the world recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. You've heard from many of them, but there's much more to come over the next 2 hours. But before we get started, I have a few housekeeping announcements. I would like to acknowledge the support of our sponsors, Alex Partners and IBM. Tech issues. If you experience any issues with audio or video quality, refresh your browser or use the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen for support. Definitely please engage with us on social media using hashtag #TheYearAhead and engage with other attendees in the event chat in the bottom right corner of your screen. And now, let's get started. I hope you enjoy the year ahead.
It is a joy to be here with you. I'm Caroline Hyde of Bloomberg Television, joined with none other than Steve Squeri, of course, Chairman, CEO of American Express, a man who we've just been discussing has New York in his bones, in his blood, through and through. It is a pleasure to speak with you, Steve. And as we look about and talk about the year ahead, as we think about the optimism we're filled with vaccines, with desire to go and spend the money that we've saved up, but then on the flip side, the worries about the variants and the rollout of the vaccine, how are you feeling? How are you working from home? How are your employees?
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Look, 2021, we're looking at as a transition year. I think it's a transition year for the world, for the United States, and for our company. When you look at what's going on in the world with COVID, I think everybody is really focused on ensuring that we have vaccine distribution, vaccine supply, and that we get the efficacy of the vaccine so that people can get back to their normal lives, whether that be traveling, whether that just be going out to dinner, whether that be opening up your small business. I think when we look at the United States, we even have another transition, as we have a transition to the Biden administration. And, our hope here is that, we can get rid of the political rancor, that we can get into a situation where both parties can work together for the good of the country to move it forward, enhance our relations with our allies and with our trading partners around the world. At American Express, the first thing we're focused on is our colleagues. And, we took 64,000 colleagues virtual back in April. I just announced the other day that if you want to work from home, you can still work from home till Labor Day, September 6th, for those outside the United States. Because what's paramount for us is to make sure our colleagues are safe, because if your colleagues are safe and well, they'll take care of your customers are well, they'll take care of your shareholders. But what we're really focused in on in 2021 is really this transition. We look at the pandemic as sort of a 2-year pause on our growth story. We had a great growth story before the pandemic, 10 straight quarters of revenue growth, of high single-digit revenue growth, high double-digit EPS growth. And so as we think about 2021, we're really focused on investing in more card member acquisition, more value for our card members and small businesses, signing more locations and building more and more capabilities, because we really want to enter 2022 and get back to where we were and what we planned on for 2020 before the world just went sort of haywire in March.
So much to dig in there with you. First and foremost, the new administration upon us. You are one of the biggest employers in New York at the moment. How do you feel that the state and the city is unrolling the vaccine? Are you having to help? How are you feeling about getting those shots in your employees' arms?
Yeah, so look, it's I think it's been a bit of a challenge, whether you're in New Jersey, whether you're in New York. But remember, we're across the entire United States. And so, at the beginning, I think there were some challenges with distribution. And I think as they start to work distribution out, we now have some challenges with supply. I think, logistics is always tough. I think that over time, hopefully by the March timeframe, if not the end of February, we'll have more supply, we'll have the distribution down, and we'll get our employees and everybody else vaccinated. I think the trick is that not to rush. And I'm not rushing people back into the office. As far as our own employees, we're willing to help, and we're willing to help the government, the city, the local states, what have you, if in fact we can help from a distribution perspective. We haven't been asked yet, but if we do, we do flu vaccinations for our employees. If in fact we can help and help our employees get vaccinated, we're certainly willing to do that if and when we're asked.
Of course, Steve, this has been primarily a health crisis, but it's also been an economic crisis, and one that the administration is trying to get its hands around on both parts of that. We're actually just been polling our audience, asking about what the consumer, what they want to do when, as 2021 unfolds, how they feel. And it was interesting, actually, more than half of them wanted to save money at the moment. 25% want to pay down debt. The others want to make major purchases. But what's so crucial with the conversation with you is you have got the bird's eye perspective of the consumer right now. What are they telling you? An Amex user, an Amex holder, are they desiring to spend? Are they already booking holidays?
Yeah, so, what we're seeing is a couple things. Number one, our customer base tends to be high credit worthy, high net worth individuals. And, at the beginning of the pandemic, they were having some struggles from a financial perspective as well. What a lot of people don't realize is we lend money just like anybody else lends money. And we put them into some financial assistance programs, and we got them through through their problems. What we then saw was a shift in spending. Consumers by definition consume. And if they weren't consuming travel, they weren't consuming dining, they started to consume, and we see them consuming more and more online. So we call it non-T&E spending. So anything that's not travel related. And we look back at the last couple of quarters, we had growth over 2019 in our non-T&E categories. So we see consumers spending online. Our holiday spending was up almost 11%. Our online consumer spending was up about 40%. Our expectation is that trend is here to stay, and that will continue. But what we're hearing from our consumers is they are desperate to get back in travel. They are desperate to get back and go out to dine. We're seeing a 60% increase. 60% of the people that actually had booked vacations in 2020 have rebooked for 2021. More the June, July, August timeframe. But I think we're going to see, once you have the perception of herd immunity, the efficacy of these vaccines have been proven out, you will see a rush to travel. We see a lot of people, and what we're hearing from our customers are they want to get back out and they want to travel.
What's so amazing, Steve, so terrifying in a way, but so good on the data is that, I mean, I looked at my Amex online on my app, and it's pushing me, to buy wine, to buy stuff for my kids, but clever creative things. It really taps into where I'm at right now. I mean, whether I want to pay for some more content on my television as well. You had to innovate, though. You had to understand who your consumer was and then offer them new things rather than the hotel that I might one day be able to stay at again. How have you used digital to be able to respond to this crisis? Have you had to lean on it more?
Yeah, we've definitely leaned on digital a lot more. You just referenced the app. I mean, one of the things that we did, and the team was fantastic at pivoting very, very quickly. We realized early on that some of the value proposition components were challenged during these times. Obviously, fine dining and hotel stays and things like that. And the team really pivoted and came up with credits for cellular service or streaming services. And the reality is we pushed more card members to our card that way. You saw offers that were targeted to you as an individual that we were able to give you through the app. All of that is done digitally. So we looked at more digital spending. We looked at more digital offers through the app. And what we saw as a result of that is the percent of our online or digital spending went way up. As I mentioned, 40% during the holiday. And that's going to be here to stay. So one of the positive things of the pandemic is I think it pushed digital maybe 3 to 5 years forward and pushed our thinking and pushed our capabilities faster and further than we probably would have gotten to without the pandemic.
What was interesting is actually during the pandemic, the people coming on, you're adding gold and platinum card holders to your ranks at the same sort of pace as you were pre. Where are they coming from? Are they new to premium products? Are you gaining market share?
Yeah, so what happened was, if you go back to last year, we had a little bit of a slowdown in the second quarter. But when we got to the fourth quarter of last year, we added platinum cards and gold cards at the same rate that we did in the fourth quarter of 2019. There's a lot of great investment opportunities out there. There are a lot of people that go through blogs and so forth and look at the value of our product, and they saw how we were pivoting the product. And so when you look at our value propositions overall, not only will they have the traditional travel components to it, but now we've added in other components, as I said, wireless and streaming. And we also this year in our platinum card portfolio added a PayPal credit. So, as a consumer, you embed your American Express Platinum card into PayPal wallet, you get a $30 credit per month for the next 6 months. And we think that's going to add a tremendous amount of value as well. And it's a lot of savvy consumers out there that are looking for good value, good service, from a company like ours.
And savvy businesses as well. And you provide facilities to small and medium-sized enterprises. That's a big focus of the Biden administration, particularly businesses led by women or minorities. How are you seeing SME demands on you right now?
Yeah, well, look, I think the first thing you have to realize is that small businesses are a lifeline of this country. And small businesses through this pandemic got hurt very, very badly. Now, we have a wide range of small businesses. They run from restaurateurs that accept our card, that use our card for purchasing, to small retail. But you also have to think about electricians and doctors and lawyers and plumbers and so forth. These are all small businesses as well. And so small businesses really needed our help, which is why, not only in the United States, but globally, which is why we had our small business shopping campaign on a global basis last year, 18 countries, 12 weeks. We spent over $200 million. You will see us this year continue to push the demand for small business spending. We're going to take that through the rest of the year, whether it be dining, whether it be shopping, using our assets. So many restaurants with limited capacity have now used Resi, which is our restaurant reservation system, because you need to manage it a lot better. And Resi does a fantastic job of doing that. And so we will see us out there with more offers, more business-to-business spending. And we're out there to support our small businesses and continue to acquire more small business cards and more small business merchants.
Steve, you mentioned it, the global part of your business as well. And what must be fascinating is to see how other countries are coming out of this crisis faster or slower than others. And unfortunately, I'm sat here in London where lockdown is disastrous right now. But also, you're in China. How is business in China? What are you learning there? And also, how optimistic are you about it with the Biden administration perhaps not looking too lovingly towards the country?
Yeah. So look, we've gone through. China's been a labor of love for a long time for a lot of us. I've been here for 35 years. We've been talking about China for the last 20 years or so. We were fortunate in June of last year to get our clearing and settlement license. And last year we added millions and millions of merchant locations for local Chinese card members to use, and for just traveling American Express card members to use. Not that there are a lot of travelers right now. But business looks good, because what we've done is we've signed up 16 banks to issue American Express cards, which is about 90% of the market. We've got 17 merchant acquirers, which are adding millions and millions of locations. And we have deals with the top 3 mobile providers, WeChat and Alipay, where we have parity acceptance. So we think China is really going to be a good growth opportunity for us, not only in the market, but as our Chinese card members leave the market. As far as the administration goes, look, there was a lot of rancor with the Trump administration as well. And one might say, with the name American in your name, it may not be the best brand to have. But look, what we have found is we've worked very closely with the Chinese, with the PBOC. We have a great relationship with our JV partner, Lian. And the brand does resonate very well within China. So we're hoping that, cooler heads prevail, that we do get to a sort of a detente basically with China, and we're able to continue our growth.
Let's talk a little bit more about the political side, what the Biden administration is doing, and not so much just about China, but in general right now. We've spoken about this has been a health crisis and an economic crisis. It's also been a social crisis, not just in America, but for many, the year 2020 and beyond. And then at the beginning of 2021, quite clearly became a political crisis in the United States and the events of January the 6th. How is your relationship with politics as a business now, as a corporate? How are you looking at the funding of it, to be honest?
Yeah. So let me answer both the social side and the political side here, because it was a year like no other. I think we can all admit that. And I think it all started, social justice came into our purview back in the June timeframe. When I started here 35 years ago, companies didn't stake out a position relative either politically or socially. I think employees look for their company to stake out a position. Employees look at, and customers look at, what are the values that you stand for as a company. And so, with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we felt we needed to do something. And it's not only make a statement, but actually take action. And so, we looked inside. We looked inside our own company at our own biases, both conscious and unconscious. And we created an office of diversity, inclusion, and business engagement, where we really looked at our brand, our culture, our colleagues, our community involvement, our business relationships, and our customers. And were we being welcoming? Are we a brand? Are we an organization that welcomes everybody? Is it an organization where everyone can be their best within the organization. That's what we're striving for. And we've committed to over $1 billion over the next 4 years against all of these initiatives. And it's all about values. And so when you fast forward that to what happened on January 6th and the political environment and donation, we want to align our political contributions, which are all employee funded. Our political action committee is all employee funded, with those people that represent our values. And our values are social, and our values are around good judgment. And so for those that we've decided not to fund going forward, we believe they didn't exercise good judgment.
You spoke so passionately there about the focus on your employees and how you represent also what you need to represent with internally, but also externally, your stakeholders who are the consumer. What have you learned about yourself since that June moment, since social justice became to the forefront, and since we have this ongoing discussion about inequality? And of course, you're representing a business that does help those with more cash to splash than others. How do you feel about that? I know you're a man who's got not one, not two, but 4 daughters, and I'm sure of different age spans. And we know the next generation just think about this in a different way, in a more focused way, in a more progressive way as well.
Yeah, I'm sitting in my office right now. I'm looking out the window and I'm looking at Ellis Island. And both my grandparents came in from Ellis Island. And they were subject to bias and discrimination. And I think it was an awakening. It was an awakening for me that I had a platform and I had an ability to make a difference. And I can make a difference in this company. And I think it's something that would have made my grandparents proud because, when they came to this country as immigrants, it was tough. And, when I think about here we have Americans who are not immigrants, but who, are in this country and are being treated totally unfairly. And I think, it was awakening, and it was an opportunity for me to stand up to the organization and say, we will not tolerate bias, either conscious or unconscious bias. And it's important that we have that awareness. And it's important that we educate you, and it's important that we then engage on this topic. And so it is one that really hits at home for me, and it's one that, sort of went back to my own heritage.
Well said. And I know you're a man who puts your money where your mouth is, your time where your mouth is, and you're still working with schools in Queens and the like. So one that, we thank you for your work in that respect. Let's talk about sort of, you've almost had to disrupt yourself inside the way that we all look at the business, but also the disruption 2020 and that cause. We talk about the focus on fintech that you've had. And I know you made acquisitions. You talk about Resi, you made acquisitions with Cabbage as well. We've actually got a question from the audience right now, just talking about, are you concerned at all about the disruption, or do you think this is good for finance as a whole with some of the new startups coming on board and the way in which sort of it's being more, we look at what's happening in the market right now, people doubling down on retail stocks, retail investors being able to buy the most shorted. Is this democratization? Do you feel that fintech brings that?
Well, look, fintech, we welcome fintech, and I'll explain why we welcome fintech. I think for us, for fintech, it's an opportunity for partnership. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity for acquisitions for us. And it's also an opportunity to be challenged. And when you're challenged, it brings your best out. And so if you look at how we've gone across this continuum here, we have a great partnership with PayPal, where you can transfer money between your American Express card and your Venmo account. You can use Pay with Points. They acquire merchants for us. Same thing we have a partnership with Square and Stripe, and they bring merchants on board for us, and that's really good. Cabbage and our acquisition of Cabbage was an outstanding opportunity for us to put a digital platform in a faster way in front of our SME base. And we're really excited about that. We also acquired AcomPay, which really does more B2B spending for us. And then you look and you have others that are competing from an issuing side and competing from a lending side. And I think it challenges you. It challenges you to be more agile. It challenges you to be your very best. And so we welcome the challenge, because with challenge, it brings opportunity and partnership opportunities as well. So I think we've become a better company because of the challenges that are out there.
And I know you've got your eye on, some of the competition and interesting businesses are being grown from a startup perspective, because you've got Amex Ventures. Are you looking, I've sort of got to ask, before we were all completely focused on GameStop, we were kind of focused on Bitcoin as well. Are you guys looking at crypto? I know some of these startups are offering ways in which you can, lend, borrow, get cash out in the machine, and also buy crypto. Is it something that you're interested in?
Yeah, look, we look at crypto. We've got investments in a few companies within crypto. We look at the underlying technology. I think do I see it as part of my value proposition in the short term? No. Do I see it as am I going to put my balance sheet in it? No. You've seen some headlines around that, but I think it's something that's worth studying. Underlying technology is very interesting. And so, you never say never, but right now we're sort of investing and watching.
We've got so many audience questions coming in. I'm great that you're stirring such a call to action from the audience. We've got one asking you about your plans for expansion in the emerging markets. We talked about China. You're focusing there. How about the rest of the world? Talk to us about your global operations.
Yeah, so, our model is a little bit different than anybody else's model, as we are an issuer, a network, and an acquirer. So you can think about us as we're part Visa, we're part JP Morgan, and we're part Fiserv. I mean, we're all of those things in one. And when you're like that, what you really need to do is to pick out and stake out where you're gonna play. And so our strategy globally is we've got some strategic markets that we invest very heavily in. We have other markets that we're aggressive in, but not overly aggressive, and others that where we really just need acceptance. And so China was a big push for us. India we're still very involved in. Brazil we're very involved in as well. Right now, not so much in Africa, as it really doesn't fit at this particular point in time from an issuing perspective, but it does fit from an acquiring perspective because our card members go there and they really need to spend. But again, we're always watching, watching how things emerge and how the market winds up playing out.
I'm looking now, with just a minute left on the clock, and thinking about when we hopefully sit here again this time next year, what you think 2021 will have taught you, how you think inherently you're an optimist and we're going to come out and be holidaying and in a different place, or how will we be marked? How will you be marked?
Well, I just told 64,000 people that 2021 was our transition year in the company, and that we are going to be back to where we were supposed to be in 2020. So, yeah, you can call me an optimist, but I have a lot of confidence in our ability to get the vaccine eventually distributed, even though there's some fits and starts for the supply to get there. And I think there's just a pent-up demand for people to get back to their normal lives. And so I think, as we think about this, what you've learned through this entire process is that you need to be visible as well, and I'll continue to be visible to my employees. You need to be decisive, and you need to make decisions, because this pandemic has taught us there's so many changing things, and you need to listen. And ultimately, you need to make sure you're getting the right input, taking that input in, and then, in fact, maybe even revisiting that decision that you made early on in the pandemic, probably in the morning.
Well, we've loved listening to you, Steve, and we hope you're not just an optimist, but also a realist, and that this time next year we are back to where we were in the good days of the end of 2019. We want to thank you so much, Steve Squire, of course. He is the chairman and CEO of American Express. Just wonderful to speak with you. Thank you very much. And we wish the rest of the conference a very good day.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm Emily Chang. Thank you all for joining us. We are here with the CEO of SoftBank Group International, COO. We'll have you with us. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Hi, Emily. It's great to be here. Great to be able to chat in this virtual world.
Yes, indeed. The only hint I had about what we would be talking about is that you were going to be in Miami. So you are joining us from Miami today, where you've just announced that SoftBank is going to invest an additional $100 million in Miami startups and the ecosystem there. Tell us more about why and where this money is going to go.
So I guess most people that are in the tech world have been following the amazing work that Mayor Suarez is doing of showcasing Miami to the tech world, and knowing that Miami is so close to us, so close to SoftBank, and so close to myself, we couldn't not be part of it. And we are huge believers that in order to propel a tech hub, you need two things. You need talent, and the amazing thing of this pandemic is that people are free to live wherever they like. And once people have a chance to come and visit Miami once, especially from certain places in the West Coast, then suddenly people love Miami and they want to stay. So there's talent. But usually the second piece is capital. And what we decided to do today is to make we call it the 100 million SoftBank initiative. And that is basically we all got together within SoftBank and we made a commitment to $100 million to startup companies that are either in Miami or that are moving to Miami. So when you combine talent with capital and with so many people moving to Miami these days, we wanted to make sure that we contribute to Mayor Suarez, who is truly welcoming to see a government official actually embracing tech.
So is this new money or is this money coming from some of SoftBank's other funds like the Latin America Fund?
I mean, we will make a decision as the investments come, and we just put a number of 100 million. I mean, it could be much larger due to the fact that we have the Vision Fund, we have the Latin American Fund, we have the Opportunity Fund, and we have SoftBank's balance sheet. But the message that we wanted to send is this is money that's 100% allocated to startups, and we're doing investment that traditionally maybe we wouldn't do, maybe helping more in the startup scene. But I think Miami needs the capital in order to continue to become more of a tech city, which the major is trying so hard.
So Miami has been the talk of tech Twitter, at least until a few days ago when it became GameStop. But you've got a number of big name investors that have left San Francisco for Miami. Peter Thiel just bought a house there. What's Miami got on Silicon Valley? Like, convince me.
I mean, all you have to do is come and spend a couple of days here, and you will see the vibe that this city has, the quality of life that this city has, the difference in taxes that this city has. And I think just a hungrier government that's welcoming the tech ecosystem to say, his favorite words are, how can I help? And traditionally, we're not used to the how can I help from government agencies. So when you have a government that's welcoming you, you have an amazing quality of life, which has become quite important. When the world has moved where we can move around. We don't need to be in one place. We can choose where we want to live. You have capital. You have the brains of Silicon Valley, the brains of New York moving to Miami. The magic starts cooking, and you see so many people. I was just walking through Miami the last couple of days, and I saw so many people that I used to go see in Silicon Valley that I used to go see in Miami. So it's great. Everybody's here. Everybody's putting up ideas, and I think we're into something special. And by the way, Miami has a great soccer. Miami has a great soccer team too.
And I'm sure there's people looking at the blue sky behind you and feeling a little jealous. That said, talk of Miami being a tech hub is kind of just talk right now. Miami attracted less than 1% of all venture dollars invested in the U.S. last year. How much more of that share do you think it can claim?
I mean, everything starts somewhere, right? And what it takes is, again, it takes a government that is willing to make it easier. It takes capital coming, and hopefully today we took a first little step. We say, look, there's dedicated capital. And I met with a lot of venture capitalists and a lot of private equity, and they're all ready to put capital into. And you have a lot of companies that are moving to Miami. So I would say this is the beginning. And everything starts with first baby steps. And I think today we're making baby steps to make sure that Miami will be a player in the tech ecosystem. And also, all of us today have learned how to work remotely, how to work virtually. And a lot of the big tech companies and big companies from the world are telling its employees, look, we understand the concept of a traditional headquarters dead. And the future is going to be a distributed workforce where employees are going to be allowed to live and work wherever they want. And this is where WeWork suddenly becomes an incredible value proposition for people to be able to use the different WeWorks to show up to work, establish new startups and all that. So I think the world is changing. I think new habits have been developed during this pandemic, and I think that puts Miami in a really good place.
So you're in Miami. I know you also live part of the time in New York. You've got Masayoshi's son in Tokyo. How has this new way of life, or the way of life for the last 9 months, impacted the way that you interact, how you manage and run the companies together?
I think we're a lot more efficient. Definitely, there's no need to fly 20 hours to get to Tokyo to have meetings. Today we communicate virtually. We use Zoom, we use different video applications, and we're able to, I would say, work as efficient, or if not more efficient, in terms of the movement of information. Now, what you do miss is you miss the ability to interact with people, and this is why I think the office will come back, because you miss the innovation, you miss the mentoring, you miss those face-to-face conversations that are special as we develop our plans. However, we haven't. I don't think we missed a bit. We continue to do investment at the same pace that we were doing before. So, we haven't stopped. As a matter of fact, I think this pandemic has massively accelerated the deployment of these technology companies that otherwise might have taken a little longer. But I think we have accelerated 5 to 10 years of how the world has changed. This technology revolution, as we call it, the AI revolution, was meant to happen, but the pandemic massively accelerated the digitalization of the world.
SoftBank shares, meantime, have been on a tear, recently hit an all-time high. Given that it's moved away from being an operating company to being more of an investment holding company with a lot of different parts, some parts rolling off, like ARM selling to NVIDIA, why do you think it's doing so well?
Because we started to, we put together a plan at the beginning of the year. We shared a plan in terms of we were going to, for the first time, I would say, in company's history, we put a plan to basically monetize some of the non-strategic assets that weren't part of our future, and we decided that we wanted to become an investment company. So the first step was the merger between Sprint and T-Mobile. The second was the monetization that we did of the T-Mobile shares. I think that was the second largest secondary offering in U.S. financial market history. Then we sold ARM. We are selling our energy business. We sold Brightstar. We are continually selling our operating companies, and we have decided that we're going to focus on investing, which is what we want to do. And because of that, we have the Vision Fund 1, we have Vision Fund 2, we have our own balance sheet, we have the Latin American Fund, we have the Opportunity Fund. So we have funds that are investing in what we always said we wanted to do, and that is we're on the verge of, we call it the most advanced revolution in terms of disruption of the way we live, the way we work, and the way we play. And we wanted to make sure that we had sufficient dry powder to take on this new set of opportunities. And, I don't think SoftBank's balance sheet has been, I think they're in the best shape we've ever been. I think we have more liquidity and more dry powder than we've ever have. And in a time where there's going to be great opportunities, I think we're properly positioned to continue to take advantage of these opportunities.
So given that the world seems to be changing dramatically by the day and you have that dry powder, where are we going to see you doubling down aside from Miami?
No, it's the same. Our investment philosophy has not changed at all, right? And that is, we're going to continue to invest in companies that utilize data and artificial intelligence to disrupt traditional business models. We like companies that are making the way we work, the way we live, the way we play, making the world a better place. And that's why, you've seen us make investments on e-commerce or food. We have doubled or tripled down on food delivery. Grocery delivery has massively changed. We're huge believer in autonomous vehicles. We're going to see autonomous massively accelerated. We invest on telemedicine. We invest on companies that are technology driven to do this type of video conferences. Fintech is changing the way we move our money. Fitness is being done differently. We're in the midst of an edtech revolution. Real estate is being transacted differently. And media, AI media, such as ByteDance or TikTok, is changing the way we consume. So the whole world is moving, is changing so fast right now. And there are few disruptors, companies that are basically changing the way we live. And those are the companies that we're investing, because those are the companies that we believe are going to be the next winners of the next years and the next decades.
So speaking of disrupting traditional networks, we can't avoid the biggest story of the moment, which is what's happening with GameStop. what's happened with Robinhood today with respect to that. And I'm curious, do you see what's happening now as a fundamental shift in where power lies, whether it's in institutions or with the people, or is this just a moment of temporary insanity?
It's not. You might call it a moment of temporary insanity, but you cannot run away from reality that because of the pandemic, we have created now millions and millions of people because of the low cost of entry into a stock and the low cost of exit into stock. Now you have a diversified force of, it was 14, 15 million people who are basically trading stocks. So you cannot ignore them. I mean, they are one of the driving forces as it relates to, acquiring company stocks or future IPOs or future ways in which companies will go public. I mean, you cannot ignore that. It's definitely a new way of investing. However, yes, the madness that we've lived through the GameStop stock or through AMC and all that, I think we need to look at that and we need to learn, how to make sure that that doesn't happen again, because I don't think the stock market was set up to do this sort of speculation. So I think what we've learned from this is there's a very strong group of people that before they were not being considered, and from now on are people that are making markets, and we got to take them seriously and we got to understand it, and there will be a driving force going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, does it have you worried about bubble? I mean, I feel like, I've been covering tech for 10 years and we've been asking that question for 10 years and markets keep going up. At some point, is there a correction?
I mean, there will be corrections for certain companies, but you cannot underestimate how new companies, mainly tech companies, are basically growing at an accelerated space that otherwise they wouldn't because of the pandemic and because of the digital world that we're living today. So the market is not used to, but I mean, you have I call them these new tech companies that are massively disrupting and transforming traditional business models. So you're going to see those companies grow fast in value because they're disrupting, traditional business models. And the market is valuing because they see the power and they see the potential, the earnings potential that those companies can have in the future. So I don't think that will be adjusted. Now, the craziness that we've lived the last couple of days, sure. I mean, those things that, that doesn't make any sense. A company that doesn't generate those earnings to be valued that long and to drop 150% the following day and go up 70%. No, I don't think the market was set up for that. But, we're living at a moment where tech companies are going to continue to grow and they're going to continue to be valued a lot at very high multiples. Also, the cost of money being so low because there's so much money being pumped into the economy, then basically that accelerates these companies reaching profitability, and that's why you start seeing those valuations.
Meantime, you've got the power of big tech, various different big tech platforms being scrutinized for different reasons, whether it's Facebook and Twitter for blocking Trump or Apple for the App Store or Amazon. You've got experience dealing with U.S. regulators, with Sprint and T-Mobile. With a new administration, what action do you think that Biden's team should take on big tech? Are you in the camp that some of these companies need to be broken up, or fair play?
I'm in the camp that we need to analyze every situation differently, and we cannot make bold statements that big tech needs to be regulated. I mean, it doesn't happen. You cannot regulate things the same way you could regulate in the past because this information flows all over the world. I just think each case needs to be seen separately. However, I'm a big believer the least amount of government intervention, the better it is in order for businesses to be able to grow. Because at the end, these businesses, we cannot forget, are the ones that are employing people. And if you look at the largest increase of employment that we've had throughout the world is this gig economy workers. There are different type of workers that we got to learn how to basically integrate them to a traditional working model. But we can never forget of who is creating those jobs directly or indirectly, and be careful with overregulation.
Now, you just had the DoorDash IPO. You've got other IPOs potentially coming this year, like Didi. Given the volatility in the markets, what is your outlook, and what should we be watching for in terms of SoftBank exits?
I mean, I think sometimes you got to look at the past. The Vision Fund, which is a fund that is performing, as we've been very public, the fund is performing, relatively well. As a matter of fact, the fund is doing really good. You have to measure in the past, and you look the amount of IPOs. I think we've had already 12 IPOs in the Vision Fund, and today, there's a lot of our portfolio companies that are constantly being invited to do IPOs or to go public via SPACs. So I think there's a big appetite today for a lot of these tech companies, rather than take one more round of private capital, to basically hit the IPO market via a traditional listing or via a potential SPAC. I mean, and a lot of these companies, I think, will take advantage of those opportunities, because there's great demand from institutional investors or this new breed of retail investors to be able to invest in the big disruptors of this decade and the next decade.
Well, speaking of that, I know you can't speak to the WeWork litigation specifically, but in general, could you see WeWork getting back on the IPO track this year, or perhaps a SPAC?
So WeWork, we have been with the company now for a year, right? It's with my partner, Sandeep. He's the CEO, I'm the executive chairman. And we have put together a very clear plan on how to turn around WeWork. And we make it, we've been very bold in saying that we expect WeWork to be profitable towards the end of this year, or towards the end of towards the beginning of next year. So the WeWork turnaround is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And the pandemic plays a role with that. So once a company it's in the right track to become profitable, sure, we get I don't think there's a week that doesn't go by where we have new investors who want to invest money in WeWork, because they're seeing what's going to happen to the world of work after the pandemic. And sure, we have SPACs approaching us, on a weekly basis. I mean, one is we're humble that is happening, because a year ago, nobody wanted to even be associated with WeWork. And the fact that there's a high level of interest from our customers, from realtors, from landlords, from the financial community is something that we're humbled, and that it's a tribute to the amazing workforce of WeWorkers that we have all over the world. Time will tell, what is the right way to monetize WeWork, but right now we're heads down on turning the company around.
And you mentioned the Vision Fund. You say it's doing well. There have been some, high-profile stories, lots of personnel departures. How confident are you in, their performance this year, given that they did have to take some lumps over the last couple of years?
We're in a quiet period, and we'll be announcing results, I think, in the next few days. But what I can tell you is our large bets that we made in the Vision Fund, you can look at them today, and those are the bets that are changing the world. So I would say what I love about Masa, about the Vision Fund, about our company, is our strategy hasn't changed. Pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. And I think the world has realized that most of the investment bets that we made are actually working out, and that is reflected in terms that our stock today is trading at an all-time high, which is something at the end the market realizes the potential earnings of the future, the future potential earnings on investments that we have made. And I love our strategy. I think it's right on in terms of companies that utilize artificial intelligence to disrupt are companies that are going to win in the future. And I think time will tell, but I think we're in a very good position.
Now, before we go, Marcelo, I want to ask you about the Opportunity Growth Fund. This $100 million, another $100 million you announced last year you'd be putting into companies led by people of color. What is the progress on that? And what are you learning about how hard it has been for some of these entrepreneurs who may have great ideas and great companies to get in front of the right people?
So I would say that that's one of the most rewarding parts of my job, where one day I saw, I'm Latino, I'm Hispanic, and I founded a very large company called Brightstar. We became the world's largest company in my industry, and God, it was hard to raise money. It didn't matter that we had a successful business. So I experienced it myself, but it's something we don't talk about. And then when the whole Black Lives Matter started getting a lot of publicity, I kept on reading, and people saying, yes, I support the Black community, but people weren't doing anything. And I said, okay, we're going to lead by example, and we're going to put a fund that is solely dedicated to entrepreneurs of color, So they know that if they have a good business, they have a place to go. It's been amazing. We've examined over 700 companies. We've made close to 25 investments. And the quality of these entrepreneurs is as good as any other white entrepreneur that we have invested. But they didn't have a source of capital. And now they have a source of capital. They feel very comfortable. And we're investing. I mean, I don't think there isn't a single week where I don't have an investment committee that we're not making commitments into 1 or 2 companies a week. And it's great. And we're going to see some amazing companies because the only thing they were lacking was capital. And now that we've provided them the opportunity, now they're going to be able to thrive just like any other entrepreneur.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Marcelo, thanks so much for joining us today from Miami. Go enjoy the weather and get back to work. Really appreciate you taking the time. Marcelo Clare, CEO of SoftBank International, COO of SoftBank. We'll have more of the Bloomberg Year Ahead next.
Great. Thank you.
Consumers want to see commitment.
Every company, every government, a lot of individuals are looking at issues of race, equality, gender, all these things together.
As a newsroom, we are aiming to provide context and local nuance on everything from corporate leadership to capital to society. And we'll track where the barriers are and what's working to help break them down, bringing clarity through data, a core strength of Bloomberg's editorial team.
We're broadening and deepening our commitment with new coverage that explores what's impacting equality and how we live and work, from cultural movements to the influencers shaping tomorrow.
If you care about representation in your company, you should care about how your company is represented in the media.
That's also something that we need to think about, are the huge dollars that are being lost by excluding those people.
I'm optimistic, and I believe that progress is going to win, justice is going to win, equality is going to win.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shartia Brantley, Senior Editor for the Bloomberg Equality Summit in the Americas, and I am excited to discuss the global expansion of our equality coverage with none other than Rakshita Saluja. She is Bloomberg's Executive Editor and Global Head of the Equality Task Force. Welcome, Rakshita.
Thanks so much for having me here, Shartia. It's always great to talk to you, and it's especially great to work with you on equality.
Oh, indeed. Likewise. Before we get started, Rakshita, I just want to step back and set the scene. Bloomberg Live launched the Bloomberg Equality Summit in 2018 after numerous requests from business leaders, advocates, and thought leaders seeking to engage in timely discussions about diversity and inclusion and equality in the workplace through a business lens. Since then, we've hosted events in New York, London, and Mumbai, all while leveraging Bloomberg terminal data. And we've highlighted the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, which has been around since 2016, as well as the launch of the New Voices program, which started in 2018. But we'll talk more about those a little later. Rakshita, what is your mission as Executive Editor and Head of the Bloomberg Equality Task Force?
Well, like you mentioned, Shartia, Bloomberg News has covered equality and diversity for years now, with extensive reporting around the gender pay gap, the Me Too movement, the impact that these issues had on policy and on companies, and then the workforce changes that followed. You move to 2020 when protests erupted across the globe after George Floyd was killed, all in the midst of an economic downturn that was driven by the pandemic, that further exposed inequities that exist between demographics. And it became clear that as we chronicle capitalism, we must also account for its biggest failings, namely inequality, oppression, and systemic biases. And so the Bloomberg Equality Task Force was created. We are a group of reporters and editors from across the globe and from across Bloomberg News's core news coverage areas of finance, global business, economics, government, and technology. And our mission is really twofold. One is to build on the existing franchise by using a data-driven approach to focus on equality across the core coverage areas that I just mentioned. And two is to elevate equality news and data on the Bloomberg terminal and across our media platforms of Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Quick Take, Business Week, Bloomberg TV, radio, and of course, Bloomberg Live.
Why is now a good time to expand our equality coverage even more?
Well, we've seen and documented that the pandemic has been a huge driver of economic inequality. And to a great extent, it's been along racial lines. But as the world starts to dig out of the depths of the pandemic, it's important for us to inform our subscribers using the data and research tools that we have at Bloomberg, just how economies and institutions are resetting to foster a more equal recovery. So you take the Federal Reserve, for example, when in 2020, the central bank shifted its policy strategy, pledging to strive towards a broad-based, inclusive employment. Well, we'll find out now what that really means in terms of monetary policy going forward. On a similar vein, on the corporate front, there are changes that are taking place within companies relating to executive moves, boardroom initiatives, product redesigns, and all of these have increasing interest to our terminal subscribers and ESG investors. Let's not forget that this is all happening in the midst of big political change in the United States and in the UK, the incoming Democratic administration in the US and Brexit in Europe, both of which will have ramifications on policy related to inequality and diversity. So clearly the pace of news hasn't slowed down, and if anything, it's been picking up.
Definitely. So how are we leveraging the breadth and depth of our global newsroom to keep our terminal clients and subscribers informed about the most relevant business and investing issues related to diversity, inclusion, and equality?
Well, every country has its own unique experience of racism, gender discrimination, and class struggles. There are some areas where you can compare apples to apples across the world, whether they're within societal structures like literacy or child mortality, or in corporate structures like board representation and the pay gap. But there's some areas where you can't make fair comparisons. So it's important that we harness the extensive reach of our global newsroom and have journalists outside of the US who can tell stories from a local perspective. This is especially true when it comes to policies that push for social justice and inclusion. Take, for example, the new national bill in Germany that calls for more board representation of women, or when asset managers like BlackRock, in the UK say that they will vote out boards that fail to improve diversity, or retail giants like Nike take their social advertising playbook to Japan, where most companies stay clear of social justice issues. All of these stories are best told with relevant data and with cultural nuances, which can only really be achieved when you're on the ground. So, but aside from print, I'd also like to highlight a few other global initiatives. On the equality front, the Gender Equality Index that you mentioned, where terminal clients can find comprehensive information on specific data points that are related to gender equality at publicly held companies. The GEI will be expanding in 2021. A New Voices program, which provides free media training to women and other underrepresented groups, continues to expand in the US and abroad. Bloomberg QuickTake, our global streaming video platform, has launched a weekly equality segment that highlights global equality news and local stories. Bloomberg TV broadcasts a weekly equality segment with Scarlett Fu. These are just some of the ways that our client subscribers and viewers are being kept up to date on the latest news.
Well, how is Bloomberg News uniquely positioned to highlight the relationship between equality and the ESG data and knowledge investors are craving?
Well, it's interesting because according to Bloomberg Intelligence Global ESG Outlook, 2021 is poised to be a pivotal year for ESG overall. And we're seeing increasing interest from clients and investors on the S part of ESG as they look for ways to quantify it. There's also been a push from activist investors for corporate transparency on racial and gender data. As more investors want companies to release their pay gap numbers, to publicly disclose their racial data, and to increase board diversity, Bloomberg News is uniquely positioned to draw on the data and research produced by our colleagues over at Bloomberg Intelligence as we report on boardroom diversity, proxy resolutions, activist campaigns, executive compensation, social bonds, just to name a few.
Let's talk about what I like to call the Bloomberg Equality Portfolio. We're busy right now programming the Bloomberg Equality Summit, which is slated for March 17th and 18th. Can you highlight other areas of focus? Let's start with the Paycheck podcast, for example.
Yes. We're very excited about the Paycheck podcast. We are launching season 3 in March. But just to go back a bit, the Paycheck was first launched in 2018, where Rebecca Greenfield, the host and senior equality editor, explored the gender pay gap in the first 2 seasons. In season 3 of the Paycheck, we'll dig into the racial wealth gap, how we got to where we are today, and what can be done to narrow that gap. And for this season, Rebecca Greenfield will be joined by Jackie Simmons as our host. Jackie is, of course, our senior executive editor at Bloomberg. So the podcast will really explore all the ways the wealth gaps manifest, some of the radical solutions that are out there to address it, like affirmative action, quotas, reparation, and potentially anything that can lead to greater equality.
Now, can you expand on the COVID-19 tracker and the important work we're doing there?
Sure, absolutely. Well, Bloomberg has launched a comprehensive and truly impressive vaccine tracker, which is being led by our health team. And as a companion to this data project, on the equality side, we will be launching a separate demographic tracker for vaccine uptake in the U.S. We'll use available state data to look at the racial, ethnic, gender and age breakdown of who is getting the shots. And given that COVID has not been an equal opportunity killer, vaccine rollout really has been, vaccine equality rather, has been at the forefront of the rollout plans. And this tracker will look at what the states and what the countries are doing.
Now, I can't forget about the accountability tracker. What sparked this idea to track corporate pledges and commitments post the George Floyd killing?
Sure. Well, after George Floyd was killed, we saw a large swath of corporate America flood social media with pledges and targets to hire more Black people and people of color in their workforce, but also in top management roles as well. And that's when we decided that as a data-driven newsroom, we are perfectly positioned to track the progress that companies make. As we know, corporate racial data can be elusive. Companies are required to submit the data to the federal government, but they're not required to make it public. So we decided to survey members of the S&P 100 index and ask targeted questions about their workforce, their plans to improve representation of people of color at every level. We launched the first version of this tracker in October, and our plan is to go out to the companies again and to keep this tracker updated every few months.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Rakshida. We really appreciate getting an overview of our expanded global equality coverage. And I just want to thank our audience for being so engaged. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Drew Armstrong, Bloomberg's senior editor for healthcare. I'd like to welcome our panelists, Dr. Uche Blackstock, founder and CEO of Advancing Health Equity. I'll also note that Dr. Blackstock is a Yahoo News medical contributor, and Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, chief scientist from the World Health Organization. Doctors, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
So we're going to begin today talking about vaccine equity. We're in the middle of one of the biggest vaccine rollouts in history. And the conversation that I want to begin us with is, when we look at how the initial administration of vaccine and the distribution of vaccines have gone, has this been equitable at all in how things are being done? I look around at our data and I see richer countries putting themselves at the front of the line. And I suppose to a certain extent, that's a little bit unsurprising. But what are your thoughts about the considerations of equity among vaccines, both inside the US in terms of how communities are being reached, and then globally in terms of how we're seeing different countries in different parts of the world get access to vaccine?
Maybe I can start with a global perspective.
Please go ahead.
At the WHO. So at the WHO, as you know, we had this concern right from the beginning because this has happened in past diseases and pandemics and outbreaks. So we've seen this with HIV. It took 15 years before the antiretroviral medications that were available in the rich countries actually arrived in the African continent, which actually had the highest burden of HIV disease. During the H1N1 pandemic of 2009-10, we saw the same thing. We saw a few countries actually, purchasing and buying up all the available doses, both of drugs and vaccines, leaving very little for the rest of the world. And it was to avoid that we launched the ACT Accelerator in April of this year with the goals of helping to advance the R&D and development of as many vaccines and therapeutics and diagnostics as possible, but also to ensure equitable and fair allocation across countries and across populations. And so this was it is a unique experiment. I think it's probably the first time that we will be able to achieve a distribution in different parts of the world, more or less at the same time, give or take, a few weeks. And it's happened because of the coming together of many, many agencies, global health agencies, but also countries and foundations and philanthropies all supporting this initiative. So I think this time there has been a considered push to achieving equity. And the next few weeks and months will actually show how this is happening. Of course, right now we're in a position where vaccines are being rolled out in a couple of dozen countries, mostly high-income ones. And a lot of the low-income countries are still waiting for their doses. But what we're working towards as part of COVAX is to change that very quickly and start distributing vaccines in February, hopefully.
Dr. Blackstock, I want to turn to you. I mean, in the United States, we're in the first weeks of the vaccine rollout. Are we seeing equitable vaccine distribution? I know this was something that was planned for, but I'm curious for your perspective kind of in these early targeted days. And then I want to come back to both of you on kind of what is the right timeline on which to judge whether this is being implemented successfully.
I think as you mentioned, equity was definitely planned for in the vaccine distribution process. We had the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices who made recommendations regarding which priority groups should receive the vaccine based on those populations that are at highest risk, as well as those populations who are at highest risk for developing severe disease. And so we've had the rollout targeting healthcare workers and people in long-term care facilities, but we've also seen that the rollout has been quite chaotic and uncertain. And what I do see from this in these early days is that there isn't an infrastructure in place in terms of collecting data, and we can get more into this data about who is receiving the vaccine, on a granular level, down, racial and ethnic wise, but also accessibility of the vaccine. We don't really have any data on which areas geographically where what vaccines are available. And so that is data that is much needed that will help guide some of our efforts, and especially targeting equity.
So a question for both of you, what's the kind of right time period on which to judge this? Because I think, I work in the journalism world, and we obviously look at things, as soon as they're out of the gate, we're saying, okay, is this working well? Is it not working? But this vaccination campaign is going to be long, months and years we're talking about. So what is the kind of fair timeline on which to judge these efforts and begin to say, okay, this is being, they are doing a good job of this, or they're not? I know we're kind of at this very targeted stage where a lot of the focus is on healthcare workers and things like that. And so hopefully the demographics of vaccination look a lot like the healthcare workforce, though I know that there's some reasons why that's not been the case. But just addressing the time frame question, I mean, when is it proper and fair to make assessments of this?
I think that's a very good point, because at this point, at this moment in time, you feel a sense of, real anxiety and frustration, both by people and by their leaders, political leaders, when they see, the vaccines are already rolling out in some countries. But here we are, it's been a few weeks and we haven't seen any vaccines. And you can understand why they're anxious. The epidemic is raging and is out of control in many countries. But I think we do need to take a little bit of a longer term, medium or longer term view. And I would say a minimum of 6 months. First of all, it's unprecedented that several vaccines could have been developed within 12 months of a new pathogen, a new virus being discovered. And then secondly, for that to be scaled at the level of billions of doses, it is a huge ask. And I think the scientific community, as well as the companies, have really stepped up to the task. And we mustn't underappreciate or underestimate just the huge, humongous task of vaccinating billions of people. So I would say, maybe a year from now would be a good time to look back and then think about, how we fared in terms of equity across countries.
Dr. Blackstock, what's your view on that? Because I know we're certainly in the process right now of trying to collect demographic data, and we've seen issues of both vaccine refusal, and then I know some concerns about vaccine access in the United States, where I think some of these health disparities are kind of, writ small. We have a lot of the same problems that the rest of the world has, all within our borders.
Yeah, I think that we definitely need to be analyzing data in real time. We've already seen, even though the vaccines have only been out for a few weeks, we're already seeing disparities in terms of which racial and ethnic groups are receiving the vaccine here in the U.S. And I think knowing that data in real time and responding to it in real time has a lot of value to it. So while we may not see substantial changes, in weeks to months, I do think that we should be paying close attention to which populations are being vaccinated and who's able to access the vaccines.
Can I ask you, the data question, I run Bloomberg's vaccine tracker. I am arms deep in vaccine data all day, every day. I had a dream about our vaccine data collection spreadsheet the other night, which is not exactly what I thought my year would be like. But how are we doing on the vaccine data collection standpoint, just in terms of getting the information that public health authorities need to have to be able to make these decisions and make these assessments? What is that data environment like? Do we know who's getting vaccinated? Do we know how these campaigns are going? Are we even set up to collect this either in the U.S. or globally? Dr. Blackstock, I know you've talked a little bit about this when we chatted earlier. So why don't you start with this, and then we'll turn to the global picture.
Sure. And so we know here in the U.S., the Center for Disease Control actually has a reporting form that public health departments across the country should be using with extensive amount of demographic data. So from zip code to gender to race and ethnicity. The problem is that, these jurisdictions are not necessarily required to fill in all of those boxes. And so what we're getting and what we're already seeing is incomplete data. So, for example, right now, there are only 17 out of the 50 states that are actually reporting racial and ethnic demographic data. And so what we're seeing is incomplete data, and we're not really able to make decisions based on the incompleteness of the information that we do have. And so we need a more coordinated national response. We need public health departments to almost be mandated to submit those specific demographic data that will help drive, especially our equity strategy.
Dr. Swarna, is that the same case globally? I mean, how does the data environment compare in different countries that are collecting it? I feel like I almost see less demographic data showing up in some of the countries that are reporting on, at least on public-facing dashboards and things like that. What are you all seeing so far from the WHO's perspective?
Yeah, so we just heard about the challenges at the national level. And then when you get to the global level, obviously you depend on the data that's going to feed up, from the state to the federal level and then up to the global level. And at each level, you're going to lose, a little bit of detail and granularity. And these vaccine rollout programs have been started so quickly, with such urgency in order to save lives, that things are being improved and, they're evolving as we're going along. So I'm sure that it will improve, that we will start seeing, much more granular data. And for us, it's really important also, as Dr. Blackstone was saying, for us to look at the global level to see how different countries are doing in terms of their vaccine rollout, what problems they're facing. And we are already discussing with those countries that have started rolling out, to understand both on the operational and logistical side, but also on the demand side, the acceptance and what those challenges could be. So I think it's really important. And, you're doing a great job also of the vaccine data tracker. We hope that we will also have, the WHO will have by March, a dashboard that will be able to track vaccine coverage in countries. But again, we're going to have to depend on countries to actually provide that data to us in a timely manner.
You mentioned something I think is really interesting, the kind of the demand side of this, where, right now we're in an environment where the supply of vaccines is not huge. Every dose does seem to be mostly getting used, obviously with some exceptions. But what are we seeing in early days around vaccine hesitancy or vaccine refusal? I know that has kind of certain characteristics in the US. I'm wondering about it globally as well. And how is that a problem we solve with this in the context of a pandemic?
So, so here in the U.S., we're seeing it based on just different demographic groups, even down to political affiliation. We're seeing vaccine acceptance, vary, racial and ethnic basis. And so I think that one area that needs to be focused on is public health messaging. We actually are months behind on expansive mass public health campaigns educating the public about the vaccine. And what I will say is, I don't think that campaign should be a one-size-fits-all. It really needs to target specific populations and the concerns in those populations, and should be culturally responsive and also done in a very digestible way. I will have to say that the amount of information that's out there on the vaccines, on the research and development process, can be overwhelming, even to myself as a physician. So we really have to find a way to communicate this information about what vaccines are, why are they important, not just to yourself, but to your community, in a way that is easily accessible to varying communities.
Dr. Swaminathan, how does this, globally, I think one of the things I thought was very interesting a few years ago when I was looking at measles vaccinations rate was seeing that in some places in Europe, it was actually quite a bit lower. We were writing stories about this in the United States, and we were actually looking at some of the data in Europe and seeing there was an even larger problem there in terms of measles cases. Can you talk a little bit about how this problem shows up in different types of global environments, both in the outside the U.S. and the developed and the developing world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the first thing I would say is I think most of the surveys that have been done recently have shown that more people want to take the vaccine than those who don't want to. So there's still the majority of people who would like to take the vaccine. The proportion of those who are reluctant varies from country to country. And it is interesting that there are more people in the higher income countries in the so-called developed world that are hesitant to take vaccines in general, and in this vaccine as well, than there are in the developing world. And if you look at vaccine coverage, for example, you mentioned the big outbreaks of measles in Europe the last couple of years, as well as in certain parts of the US. Measles coverage in large parts of Africa and Asia has been going up every year, and measles outbreaks are coming down. Now, I just want to add to what Dr. Blackstone said. I think one of the things that people are concerned about is the speed with which these vaccines have been developed. As I mentioned, less than a year. The fact that all of the science has been playing out on the front pages of newspapers, and everyone doesn't necessarily understand, the technicalities of clinical trials. So I think a number of people, rather than being anti-vaccine, are just want more information. They want to be reassured, and they have questions that they want answered. So I think we need to do a couple of things. Governments will need to do a couple of things. I think the communication is absolutely critical before the vaccine even starts getting rolled out. We need to start communicating about how it was developed, how it's assured quality, how the follow-up is going to be done, and how the government is taking all steps to protect their communities, but also creating enabling environments for people. I mean, I think if you make vaccination difficult for the average person to access, then the turnout's going to be low. So trying to figure out what's the best way of actually doing vaccination in different communities and making it, convenient for them, and having someone who can answer their questions, and having credible leaders in the community, whether they are celebrities or whether they are spiritual and religious leaders or whether there are other kinds of community leaders. You need those kinds of things now to mobilize people, especially when we're wanting to vaccinate, over 70% of the population to basically bring an end to this pandemic. That's huge. You have to cover a lot of people. And I think the more communication we do, the better.
When you all look at...
Can I add something? No, I think Dr. Somanathan brought up some really wonderful points. I wanted just to mention that some of the challenges that we're having in the States is that those communities that have been most devastated and impacted by the virus are the ones where we're seeing a higher degree of vaccine hesitancy. So that is, again, I think, points to the importance of not only communication, but the accessibility of the vaccine, ensuring that we don't just have it as we have here initially in hospitals and pharmacies, but we have mobile units that can vaccinate. We have in schools and community centers, that we really ensure that we make vaccines equitable to every community based on their needs.
I wanted to ask both of you, adding on to that a little bit. I mean, has the vaccine rollout in the U.S., as you all observe, where we've seen a handful of kind of changes of rules and a very, thoughtful but also highly complex system of kind of who goes first and how they go. Does that, I guess what I'm trying to ask is some of that complexity in and of itself a problem when people don't really, the public may not understand, wait a second, when is it my chance to get this thing? Yeah, I thought I was going to be able to get it. I'm calling around. I can't find it. Okay, now the rules are changing, and then now they're going to change again. I mean, how problematic are these types of, either levels of complexity or kind of changes in how these things are done in terms of building trust, that people can go out and get this? You all mentioned making this easy, and it almost feels like what we're seeing right now is just the opposite of that in the United States.
Yeah, what I will say is I think, part of the issue that we had was that there was really been no national strategy to containing the virus. And so what we're seeing is we saw as a continuation of that in terms of the vaccine distribution process. But I will definitely say that public messaging is everything, and that any rapid changes without explaining why the changes and how they would benefit, communities and populations is really incredibly important, and that there has to be a high degree of transparency in the process. And I think people can understand why some of the earlier priority groups were given priority. But in terms of the later groups, there really needs to be, again, a public messaging campaign about why this next group is getting priority, and an explanation to the public. I think that will help. But also, I think that the public needs to understand that this is a quickly changing situation, and that depending on supplies and response, that there will be some changes that may be unexpected. But as long as we're communicating those changes in an effective way, that matters the most.
Are there lessons learned globally, from what we were seeing in the United States? Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, though.
No, I was just going to say that globally we've made efforts over the last few months to really engage with, our constituency, which are the ministries of health of all our member states, and discuss with them the principles on which we're going to be basing this allocation. Because as you know, the COVAX facility is going to start receiving doses very soon. Now, these vaccines that we distribute obviously also need to have a regulatory approval. So we have the process of emergency use listing, we have the SAGE policy process, but underpinning what we call our fair allocation framework are the principles, the ethical principles based on which the prioritization was done. And there's a clear explanation for why some groups need to be prioritized. And this, of course, needs to be adapted by countries and contextualized. If you're talking about Africa, you're not talking about a lot of people above the age of 80 years. So when you talk about the elderly there, it's a little different population. It's people maybe with, comorbidities, HIV infection and so on. So countries will adapt it. But they then need in turn to communicate with their population, their public, as to, who's being prioritized and why. And there needs to be a clear reasoning. And then, of course, then you have to, as you said, the operational and logistical mechanisms need to be put in place so that it's easy for someone to get the information and then to know exactly where they need to show up to get the vaccine and when. And I think, as I said, countries are developing these systems as they're rolling out vaccines just because of the urgency. And so I think over the next few weeks, we'll see some of these problems getting ironed out. And other countries that are watching are learning from those that went early and hopefully will avoid some of these mistakes.
From the WHO's perspective, have wealthier countries fulfilled their obligations here in terms of making vaccine accessible around the world? I look at, countries that have bought 2 and 3 times the amount of doses that they need to cover their populations. And I get why they're buying backups in case some of these things don't work. But then I also look at where COVAX is supplied currently, which I think is on average enough to cover somewhere around 5 to 10% of the population of the COVAX participant states. That seems like a huge disparity to me. Is that going to resolve over time? Where are we in that? And do wealthier countries need to do much more than they have been doing here?
Absolutely. That needs to be resolved over time. And I must say that wealthier countries, they have pre-booked vaccines to cover their population several times over, but they have also contributed to COVAX. So they've made available funds. Many of them are now considering making available vaccine doses because, as they have excess doses, but we're sort of encouraging them to give us at the same time as they're vaccinating their population, not at the end when they've finished. So hopefully that will start happening. And we needed about $8 billion for 2020 and 2021. And, we've raised most of that fund. The COVAX facilities raised most of that. We will, though, need to continue beyond 21 because we're only going to get to about 20%, 25% maybe, if we're lucky, or 30% of the population of all of these countries. We have 190 countries as members of COVAX. So we will need to continue to fundraise and hopefully, we will depend on the donor countries to support the rollout in the lower income countries.
We have about a minute or two left, and I want to close on something that's a little bit different, and maybe Dr. Blackstock, you can take this first. We've been spending a lot of time talking about vaccine equality issues, but one of the things that we've been talking about internally is how prepared are governments and countries around the world for the kind of inevitable next pandemic, and what do we see in terms of pandemic preparedness inequality, disease surveillance, infectious disease surveillance inequality, and the kind of readiness for the next time we unfortunately will, I'm sure, confront this. What has this pandemic revealed about those shortfalls? Because it took us a year to get to having a vaccine while we were having to deal with all of these other things in the meantime.
Right. So briefly, I think that what we've learned over this last year is what happens when we underinvest in our public health infrastructure, as was the case in this country, unfortunately. And so Obviously, we now know having a robust public health infrastructure will be key. Putting resources into pandemic preparedness will be key. And I also think looking at healthcare and how we deliver healthcare and who is insured and who isn't insured will also play a role of how we respond in the next pandemic. And so hopefully there are lessons learned that we'll be able to incorporate before the next one.
And maybe I can just add to those excellent points that it's clear that you need not just national, but regional and global plans, because you need to collaborate and act in solidarity when you're faced with a pandemic. One country doing it well and everyone else not coping is not going to help, as we've seen. The other thing is the investments in science have paid off. The investments in science and technology, which developed all of these different vaccine platforms over the last few years, have enabled, the massive progress that we've been able to see in vaccine development. So I think investing in science and technology beforehand, building those capacities, having the global, regional, and national systems in place, and above all, when there's a pandemic, countries do need to come together. And I think the WHO is a very good place for countries to come together and work together to solve the problem.
I think that's a great place for us to leave this. So I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time to be with us today and have this conversation. I hope everybody's found it as enlightening as I have. Thanks very much, doctors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Colvin, and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Bloomberg Media. The events of this past year have raised our collective conscience as the onset of the global pandemic immediately exposed the connection between inequality and public health. At the same time, the massive protests over racial injustice have sparked long overdue conversations around the world. While much remains uncertain in this new year, one thing is clear: a new reckoning is taking place among companies, institutions, and individuals everywhere. We see it happening on the consumer level as well. For example, 66% of Gen Z cite corporate reaction to Black Lives Matter as a permanent influence on their purchasing decisions. Equality and inclusion are no longer something we might strive for. They are global imperatives, inextricably linked to the most significant forces shaping our world today, from how business gets done to urgent issues like climate, global health, and education. It is with this idea in mind that throughout Bloomberg Media and Bloomberg News, we will be expanding the Bloomberg Equality franchise commencing this March across all our media platforms, coverage areas, and geographies. We know that this is a global story with interwoven narratives that touch every aspect of our lives, and Bloomberg Media has the ability to capture this view as no one else can, with more journalists and analysts based in more countries than any other news organization. We will also apply the same fact-based, data-driven approach that is synonymous with the Bloomberg brand. Just as it is critical for our audiences and partners alike to be well-versed in topics such as technology and markets, they must also understand the latest issues, opportunities, and solutions in order to take action and create a future that's more inclusive and equitable for all. We look forward to bringing you more of this crucial coverage in the year to come. In the meantime, I also encourage you all to join us in these important conversations across social media using the hashtag Bloomberg Equality. Thank you very much all for joining us here today.
Hi, folks. My name is Brad Stone. I'm the Senior Executive Editor for Global Technology at Bloomberg. And I am thrilled to be joined today by Margaret O'Mara, Professor of History at the University of Washington, a former policy analyst on the staff of Vice President Al Gore, and the author of this tremendous book, The Code, Silicon Valley and the Remaking of America, which chronicles the growth of our tech industry over the last century and all the factors that have led us to this fraught moment in time between tech companies and their employees and democracy and even the capital markets as we're seeing today. Margaret, welcome to the year ahead.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
So let's start here with this unique moment. Over the past 2 weeks, I mean, it like all things these days, it feels like it's been a year. But we've seen the expulsion of Donald Trump and various extremist groups from Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And I just wonder, whether the social networks and the cloud platforms, have reached a turning point, or were they just gifted a case so extreme, particularly with the assault on the Capitol with its calls for overt violence, that they didn't really have to make the difficult decisions and change how their algorithms have been working and servicing extremist views?
Yeah. After years and years, decades of trying to ignore politics or be above it, the Silicon Valley and politics have crashed with a bang. I think, but in some ways the case of January 6th and of President Trump, former President Trump, is something of a gift to the technology companies, and that it is a clear case, although that ban may not hold forever. That it is he was, in a way, it diverts from this bigger question of how these platforms were built. Look, they were built to sell ads on the internet, and they've been wildly successful at what they set out to do. They're incredibly successful companies. They were not designed as political town squares. And content moderation, when in the case of Facebook and its associated properties, you have 2 billion plus global daily users, it becomes this game of whack-a-mole. It is, there's a fundamental, the real problem, the nut is the algorithmic amplification. That is part of what makes these companies, so profitable. And that is why it's such a sticky thing to untangle.
So, Margaret, we're seeing another illustration right now of the power of internet forums and the unleashed decentralized power of the masses, really, to change outcomes. And that's, the case of GameStop and how forums on Reddit have been manipulating the stock. I actually feel like just, in the past few minutes talking to you, we've probably missed some whole new turn in that episode. But you just wonder what the market's being manipulated. I mean, should there be a counterbalance to it? What is the responsibility of our public institutions, to confront the manipulation, that kind of this kind of online discourse can wreak on our markets?
Mm-hmm. It's analogous to social media platforms generally. When you create this wide open space, democratize investing, as Robinhood sort of brands itself as doing, you create, and you have it in a deregulated environment already, it creates all these kind of a runaway train. And we certainly saw this in the last 24, 36 hours. In the 90s, there were day traders where, E-Trade opened up and all these people started day trading tech stocks. But that was, not driving the market in the same way. It was this sort of relatively small scale phenomenon, just as the dot-com boom seems so small scale compared to what's going on right now with the dollar, the valuations and everything. And it's revealed, again, it's quickly become this proxy for this bigger battle between, who gets to control the markets, who has the power, who has the money. And, I think we can't, our verdict can't come now. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 12 hours, 24 hours, or 24 days. But this shows what happens when you kind of fling things wide open and see what happens, see what develops. And it's happening in this particularly volatile political environment, which makes it all more weighted.
Yeah, you mentioned how the two cases are really analogous, and before we logged on, Robinhood shut down GameStop trading, and it is very similar to Facebook booting QAnon groups and Donald Trump, and before we logged on, I saw Robinhood getting quite a lot of pushback, at least on Twitter, from folks who feel like the mission of that company is to democratize trading. So, what does happen to these platforms when they kind of they're forced almost to kind of go to war to parts of their constituency? Can they continue to do that as I guess I'm wondering, and it's, I guess we'll have to see in a way.
I think we have to see, but look, all these companies kind of came into the world promising not to be evil, promising to connect the world, promising kind of with a really techno-optimistic value prop, and also recruiting and recruiting folks on the basis of we're a different sort of company, and recruiting customers based on that. And so when you do something that your customers and your employees see as antithetical to your values, that becomes problematic. We don't know yet kind of where that will go, but it's just showing this real dissonance between Silicon Valley for a good 40 plus years, its companies have presented themselves as kind of, this is an alternative, better capitalism. And the reality is they're like any other companies. They have the same priorities. They're publicly traded companies. They're beholden to shareholders. They have these other, metrics they have to meet. And society has kind of placed they've taken them at their word to some degree. And that's a tough spot to be in.
Well, speaking of publicly traded companies, yesterday Apple announced its fourth quarter earnings and cleared $100 billion in revenue for the first time over the holiday season. And, it just makes me wonder, here we are I guess, week 2 of the Biden administration, and how the president and his administration deal with tech's power, right? What do you spent some time in Washington working for the Clinton-Gore administration. What do you think Biden's agenda is, and how do you read the tea leaves so far based on who they've hired so far?
Yeah, so it's been a long 8 years since Biden was vice president, and the Obama administration's tightness with Silicon Valley is partially where we are now, right? But looking at who Biden is appointing in key economic roles, and not only people who are kind of new faces and people who've been part of these communities that have been critiquing tech and pushing for alternative approaches to more humane capitalism, shall we say, or a reinvented corporation, but also old hands from the Clinton and Obama teams that perhaps think about these things differently given what's happened. So, there's a lot of momentum. I'm just stunned by how the political mood has changed, and politics and sentiment about tech enabled, again, this really smooth, almost frictionless runway for growth for a really long time that both leaders of both parties found these companies to be, they're the golden ticket, they're the hope, they're the sunrise industries. And that has shifted dramatically. Both Republicans and Democrats see a lot of problems with that. And there's just this general momentum to rebalance the imbalance between corporate power and government power, and to bring a better, more fair balance back, which we used to have. I mean, this is not kind of something that hasn't happened in the past. It isn't inventing something. It's really giving the government restoring its presence that it used to have.
Right. So what does that rebalancing look like? Is it something as kind of muscular as antitrust lawsuits as we're starting to see? Is it a reconsideration of Section 230, that key law that says that tech companies aren't legally responsible for what their users post on their platforms? What do you think? What form is it going to take?
Yeah, so the tech regulation debate has kind of moved from this heat and light, big, talk about content moderation and who's on and who's off, to, I think, happily a more nuanced set of, don't just abolish Section 230, think about how it can be modified in very careful ways that put some onus on the companies to have responsible content moderation policies, for example, to create a better and fairer balance between the two, and to kind of get past this internet speech is free speech. It's a different thing. This isn't a First Amendment issue. A lot of the political noises that has obscured it, and I think that antitrust enforcement historically has, more often than breaking up companies, it's slowed their roll. Either suits, in the case of IBM in the 60s and 70s and Microsoft in the 90s, neither of those big tech antitrust cases ended up in breakup, but they did force those companies to kind of chill a little bit and not be as aggressive as they were. And then the markets also changed, and they, the new competitors were able to emerge. I think right now the difference is we have a number of very large companies that have kind of sucked all the oxygen out of the room and have made it even harder for new competitors to come in. And we have some really generative examples in history of antitrust enforcement, not necessarily breakup, but regulation that has been generative of innovation. I think all the time about the 1956 consent decree placed on AT&T. That's what a nerd I am. But that consent decree, so AT&T regulated monopoly for 70 years, right? They kept on trying to get into computing, and the DOJ kept on telling them to go back, stay in your lane. And 1956, the DOJ said, you have to license the transistor that was developed in Bell Labs, license it for free. And Gordon Moore, Moore's Law, Gordon Moore, that guy, Intel co-founder, later said, we probably would have not had a silicon semiconductor industry in the Valley without that move, because it allowed all these new little companies Shockley, Fairchild, all these others to take that technology, iterate, build whole new industries. So, we should not fear kind of antitrust doesn't necessarily mean break them up or they're out of business, but it is a rebalancing of this very imbalanced political economy we have right now.
One thing that seems significantly different than those previous eras is that we don't just have one big tech company. We have five whose market value is near or exceeding $1 trillion, and in Apple's case, $2 trillion. Two of those companies, Facebook and Apple, are at war with each other, right? Just in the last couple of days, we've seen Tim Cook come out and advocate for these new standards in the App Store where users are going to be able to opt in instead of opt out to targeted advertising. And then Facebook maybe even preparing a private antitrust lawsuit against Apple. Who's the good guy here?
Well, at first glance, you're like, okay, are they competitors? At second glance, of course they are. And I think what this really points to is oftentimes big tech is referred to as this kind of undifferentiated category. And in fact, all five of these companies are very different, have very fundamentally different business models, have different priorities in terms of what sort of regulation they would like to see coming out of Washington, in terms of what sort of competitive environment is best for their business, present and future. And look, it's a really good kind of shifting the focus away, from Facebook, which is getting a lot of heat, to Apple. So it's a real, we're getting. I think there's a lot of motivations in there that are both near term and long term for these companies.
Well, Margaret, I want to talk a little bit about your book. I've got my marked up copy right here. It's just an amazing history of Silicon Valley, and one of the things you do in the book is trace the close relationship between Silicon Valley and the defense industry. And for years, I think through the 80s, you say Lockheed Martin was actually the largest employer here in the region. And yet recently, it seems like it's been all tension, right? The battle over the Jedi contract, employees saying, that their companies shouldn't sell technology to ICE, or, closing down facial recognition technology sales to police. So is that long? Do you feel like, and by the way, of course, the pressure on Palantir and border technology companies, is that long-term alliance, do you think, between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon, is that endangered?
I think it's stronger than ever, and it never really went away. And so the thing to remember about, there a few years ago with the Maven contract and the Google employees petitioning saying this isn't us. Well, actually, that is the Valley. Lockheed Missiles and Space was the biggest employer in the Valley through the 80s. The defense industry has been a major factor in the Valley's growth from the very beginning. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's the truth. And in particularly since about 2015 or so, during the Obama administration, when Ash Carter comes in and says, the way for our military to compete in the 21st century is to get the best tech we can and to partner with Silicon Valley closely. So there's been this escalation, and then with these very large cloud contracts. And so I think we need to recognize the reality, but also to recognize, take heed Dwight Eisenhower's words from 1961, in which he says, worry about the military-industrial complex, the undue influence. And again, it's I think uncovering it and recognizing that this relationship exists, that this is one really important dimension of not just how Silicon Valley works, but also, look, the government has played this really generative role in seeding research, in higher education, creating people who can be part of this, giving people opportunities to be part of this industry, through immigration policy that brings people in from around the world. U.S. was a tech leader because of these public investments and this distinctly American relationship between public and private sectors, which only the U.S. it only plays out in this way here. And that is a value add, a regional advantage, a national advantage that in the last, decade plus, we've been pulling back, and particularly the last administration was, I feel, it was an own goal in kind of immigration policy, disinvestment in certain things that were really chilling the atmosphere for future innovation. So you can't expect these companies, no matter how big their balance sheets to take on the work of the next moonshot, even though Google likes to, frame itself as that. The money isn't as big, and the public mission needs to be public. It shouldn't be serving the interests of a company, a private sector company. That isn't their job. So I'm looking, again, kind of going back to thinking about what's next in the new administration. You're seeing these, already Biden is making, executive order the last couple of days to invest in green technology. Defense is one piece of a broader and one would hope kind of reinvigorated government private sector research relationship that's good for business. It's good for the economy.
Well, Margaret, we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you, earlier today here at the Year Ahead, we had Marcelo Clore from the SoftBank Vision Fund, and one of the things he said was he's making a major investment, SoftBank is, in the Miami area as part of their Latin America fund, and it just kind of raises this question, which, we've both been doing this a long time, so we've heard it again and again, but it does feel more urgent now. Is Silicon Valley imperiled? Does the focal point of technology in the U.S., is it going to Miami? Is it going to Austin? In the now minute plus we have left, what do you think?
Not yes and no. So there was already decentralization before COVID. COVID has accelerated a lot of things, work from home, decentralization of startup activity. That's just gone faster. The money is concentrated in the Valley, and there's still a lot there. Most of the activity is still there. And I think we need to remember that one of the secret ingredients of the Valley is time. It's multiple generations of innovation, one company after another after another. It's going to take a long time for other places to catch up.
So you're in Seattle, right? So you're not moving anytime soon. Seattle, with Amazon's presence, continues to be a technology hub.
Yeah, even though the winter weather is better in Miami, I will be staying here in lovely Seattle. Now, Seattle is, in a way, it benefits from a symbiotic relationship with the Valley and is on its own a major tech hub and will continue to be so.
Well, Margaret O'Meara, there's more we could talk about. We have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brad Stone.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are closing out the show today with a very special guest, Airbnb CEO and co-founder who's had a few things going on in the last couple of months, Brian Chesky. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me today, Emily.
So you've been a public company now for 7 or 8 weeks. We've got a vaccine rolling out slowly. When the pandemic hit last year, you said you felt like you had been hit by a torpedo. So just where's your stress level right now between like 0 and torpedo? What's going on inside your brain?
It's, if I was a captain of the ship, the waters are a little calmer than they were last year. There's nothing quite like being a CEO of a travel company and you lose 80% of your business in 8 weeks as you're preparing to go public. And if that's not crazy enough, then going public as that company, that's also pretty wild. So it was a very eventful year last year. I'm hoping for a little bit more predictable year this year.
So on that note, you've got a new report out on travel trends in 2021, and you said you can't look too far ahead, but you can give us a picture of this year. What does travel in the year ahead and the waters, essentially, what do the waters look like to you?
Yeah, so I think that what's going to happen is you think about where we are today. Most people have been in their homes, and they haven't really been able to leave their homes very much for nearly a year. And this travel season, people will mostly have been sheltering in place for more than a year, working from home. And we did a survey, a representative survey of American travelers, and they told us a few things. The first thing they told us is they miss traveling. In fact, Americans miss traveling more than any other outdoor activity. Second, Americans are telling us they actually are planning to travel this year. 54% of Americans surveyed said they either already are planning their trip or plan to travel this summer. But something's going to be different about how they travel this summer. You see, the thing people don't miss is business travel. They say the travel they miss the least is traveling for business. They don't miss landmarks. They don't miss crowded lobbies. They don't miss getting on double-decker buses. What they miss is, the thing they feel like was taken away from them, connection to their family and their friends. So the kind of travel they want is meaningful travel, not mass travel. They want to have meaningful time with their friends and family. And so they want to get in cars in America and travel within a tank of gas about 200 miles, typically staying in small communities with their friends and family. I think that's what travel is going to look like this year, a shift from mass travel to meaningful travel. And I do think it's going to be really eventful, certainly summer for travel.
Okay, so summer is your time frame when you think things start to open up, and when that happens, does it look like the Roaring 20s? I mean, give us the picture.
Well, it's a little hard to say. Anyone who was in the business of predicting, I said in my letter, anyone in the business of predicting the future was humbled last year. So I'm going to try to stay within the constraints of what we think will happen. I think it's going to be gradual. And, it's hard to say what month it's going to happen. I use summer for a proxy. For the moment, people feel safe leaving their homes. I think vaccinations are going to be critical. One of the two of the top reasons people want to get vaccinated is they want to see their friends and family and be safe, and they want to travel and be safe. But one of the things they want to do is they want to travel to places where they're either private, not around a lot of people, or in cities and communities where most people have been vaccinated. So I think it's a little hard to predict. I think it's going to be really moving in line with the health crisis. But yes, the Roaring 20s did come after the Spanish flu. And so I think people are yearning to get outside and to be together. I think you can't keep people apart for too long. And I think that's something that we're going to learn again.
So we should be booking our summer vacations now to avoid the crush, is what you're saying.
Well, who knows? I'll try to not predict too much. The good news is I don't think everyone's going to be going to the same city on the same date. I think because people are more flexible and they're working from home, they can kind of take, I don't think you're going to have this flood of everyone going on the same week to Las Vegas or Miami or LA. They're going to probably, because not as many people will be flying right away, be distributing to more communities. So I think we're going to see is more people going to more places over more dates. That's going to spread out travel, which will probably reduce crowds. That's what I think will probably happen. Now, these are just predictions, of course.
Now, Brian, my interview with you on IPO day went kind of viral. I told you live on the air that the opening price had doubled, and we all saw your eyebrows go up really high. What was going through your head in that moment?
Well, first of all, I did not know my eyebrows went that high either. But what was going through my head was just, I don't know, at that moment, I think it was kind of a flashback of the last year. Because I remember we started 2020, like a lot of people did, thinking their life would be one thing. And then all of a sudden, our stock just goes down significantly. Probably in the depth of the crisis, our stock was, just a little over $20 a share. And, we had got all hands on deck, and we said, we're not really going to worry about things we can't control. We're going to focus on trying to truly build a great company. And I think at that moment, the year crystallized for me. The year crystallized everything we did and everyone that believed in us. And it all probably, I think, really hit me at that moment.
So Airbnb last year, in one of those private funding rounds, was valued at $18 billion. Now it's a $113 billion company. In your view, is Airbnb really worth that? You're the guy who has to deliver and make it so.
Well, I don't want to comment on a stock price. I think it's going to get a dangerous pattern for me to start doing that. But I will say that we are building a company for the very long term. I know that probably sounds like a cliche, but I'm 39 years old. So I do intend to be doing this for decades to come. And, I don't want to get into comment of comment on stock price, but I will say that the higher the price, the higher the expectations, and the higher expectations, the more responsibility we feel. So I think we already felt a lot of responsibility before, but I now feel a lot of responsibility for all the new stakeholders, all the new shareholders we have. And, that just motivates us even more.
Now, when this happened, Airbnb, as you said, went back to its roots, focused on homes and home sharing. You put some things on hold: business travel, luxury, hotels, transportation. Are there any plans to restart some of those initiatives?
Oh, sure. I mean, like down the road, we will. But the thing we are realizing right now is we do think a travel rebound is coming. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. No one knows exactly when, but we want the company all hands on deck focused on this new travel season. And so we think we have a great core business. And that business really is hosting. We have 4 million hosts offering homes and experiences. And we want to make sure that we have as many hosts ready this summer as possible, this travel season as possible, and make sure anytime they need assistance, we're there for them. So again, down the road, we think there's a lot of new opportunities for Airbnb, but I think the thing that got us out of the crisis was focus. And we're not going to forget that lesson.
So, you're now a public company CEO. How has life changed for you, for the company in the last 8 weeks?
It's like a bunch of my friends who got married, and they said their life didn't change that much after they got married. I guess after kids they do, but in that way everything just feels a little bit more formal. But other than that, we've been operating like a public company for quite a long time. We've had an audit committee. We had a lot of the same kind of controls you'd expect as a public company. Our financials seem to get out every quarter anyway, even as a private company, and not not for any intention of our part. So I just think the main difference is just the sense of formality when you're a public company, and just the sense of responsibility is just so much more vast. Certainly when venture capitalists and mutual funds and private equity firms are investing in you, you do feel that responsibility. But when there are hundreds of thousands of shareholders who are kind of like the people you grew up with, I don't know, especially our host, there's a different level of gravity to it. It just feels like a whole nother stakeholder, essentially.
Obviously, the hosts are really important to Airbnb, the Airbnb community. Also, there's employees. You laid off 1,900 employees last year. Now that things are better, how many of those jobs have you actually brought back, and where? Where are you putting your new resources?
Yeah, so you're referencing the hardest decision I've ever had to make when we had to lay off 1,900 of our employees. The first thing I'll just say is we tried to do everything we could for those employees. And one of the novel things we did is we created an alumni directory. An alumni directory meaning that we allowed anyone that was laid off to opt in to have their information published on our online directory. We had more than 500,000 visitors to that online directory. And so actually what we found, and we've done some surveys of former employees, is that quite a few of them actually been hired in other positions at other companies, and they do seem to be doing quite well. Now, we have hired a handful of employees back, and we do intend to continue to hire employees back. But the other thing I've told our employees is you want to, hope for the best and plan for the worst, and we don't know what's going to happen again. I don't want to ever have to do another layoff, so we're still being fairly cautious about the pace of bringing people back, but I'm very optimistic we'll bring a lot of people back down the road.
Now, anecdotally, as a user, I've noticed that customer service has really improved, and you've been working on building out the customer service infrastructure. That said, customer service has often been cited as a risk factor because, can the customer service of Airbnb really stack up to what you might get at a hotel, for example? Can you talk to us about the resources you're devoting there and how you think that'll evolve as Airbnb becomes a bigger and bigger company?
Yeah, it's a great question, Emily. I mean, we have a great team that leads this. And last summer, I hired a woman named Tara Bunch. She actually ran all customer service and Apple Care for Apple. And she managed a very large team there. We brought her in, and she took a team that was already they've taken, I think, things to the next level. And that's part of what it means to be prepared. We don't want to just have best-in-class service. We want to have truly world-class service. And so we're working all hands on deck to make sure that when the travel rebound comes, and again, we don't know exactly when, we want to be ready. We'd rather be early than late. And so we just want to make sure that we have great service. And one of the things we're seeing in the hospitality industry is many other companies are starting to cut back service. As they cut back costs, they cut back services. We want to be doing just the opposite. We want to be increasing service and investing even more. We think now is the time to be investing in making sure that every stay is as great as it can be. So really perfecting every detail of our service. That's what we're focused on right now.
So speaking of the broader hospitality industry, we had the CEO of Hilton on earlier this week at this conference. In the third quarter of last year, we saw Marriott revenue, Expedia revenue drop 57, 58%. For Airbnb, it was more like 18%. And I wonder, when travel does come back, even more than it already has, are hotels harder hit? Will some of the hotel travel just never come back?
Well, I think the way to think about it is to think about the types of travelers. I think you could break it up into leisure and business. Leisure, typical vacation business. I don't think that business travel is coming back the way it ever was. It doesn't mean business travel is not coming back. It's just, I think people are going to rethink getting on a plane for a meeting. Sometimes you'll do that, but we're starting to realize that a lot can be done remotely. A lot of your first interviews with me were in person. Now this interview is being done remotely. So I think what's going to happen is business travel is going to contract. It's not going to come back to the way it was. I do think a new type of business travel will emerge. If you have a lot of people working from home and distributed, they do eventually want to see each other in person. We're not going to live in a world where no one sees each other in person. So you're going to have more of this hub and spoke model where people go back to headquarters for longer trips. So I think old business travel will be replaced by new business travel, but I think that will be longer stays and less frequent. And so I don't think business travel will be as strong. I think leisure travel will go up increasingly because the more you're home, less you're traveling for business, the more you want to get out of your house, and more people have flexibility. And so I think that will increase, and I think that's going to really increase length of stay. And so I think that will be a difficult transition, moving away from business travel and towards longer stays. But that being said, anyone that can adapt can win in this environment for sure.
Now, online experiences, you've really been building out that platform. I've seen, like thousands of reviews for a virtual tour in Paris, or my son is super excited about the Harry Potter magic tour in Edinburgh. What kind of growth have you seen there since COVID? And can you keep that up post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, the way we started online experiences was really, the idea came from our host. We have experiences which are 3-hour activities in person. Because of the pandemic and social distancing, we had to pause that product last year. And an idea came from one of our hosts in the listening session. They said, what if we just did these online? People don't need to leave their house. And so we launched these 1-hour online activities. The whole idea is there's a sense of connection. It's not like watching YouTube. You actually can do a pasta making class, you can watch a concert, but you're interacting with the other guests and the people, typically done through Zoom. We've seen a lot of growth since then. And one of the things we found is it's a bit like dipping your toe in the water of Airbnb. If going to a different city or get a different town and staying in a stranger's home feels like a big jump for you, kind of getting used to Airbnb with an online experience remotely from your home is, I think, a really great introduction to the community and gets you more comfortable with what a host is, how the whole system works. So that's one of the things we think is really strategic about this product.
Now, if anything's for sure, it's that we don't know what, as you say, potentially even tomorrow looks like. We had a few moments of calm after the inauguration, but the year's already gotten off to a crazy start. You made a big call in canceling reservations in Washington, D.C. the week of inauguration. You reimbursed hosts for the money that they would have made. You've also paused political donations to lawmakers who voted against election certification. Can you give us any update on that and, the responsibility that you feel to make stands on political and social issues that we haven't seen CEOs make in the past?
Well, I learned an early lesson in this because when I came to Silicon Valley in 2007, 2008, the idea was we were all platforms and platforms should be hands off. And the idea, and it kind of was like this old kind of eBay, Craigslist, Pierre Midyar, Craig Newmark school of thought. The internet's kind of like an immune system. Build the community tools and they will moderate themselves. I think that Airbnb, we learned lessons earlier than big tech companies because we had people getting their homes trashed. We had people getting physically hurt or worse. And we started to realizing that we had to take more responsibility for the activity on our platform. If for no other reason to keep people safe, that's a very good reason to do that. And so we've been doing this for a very long period of time. We really try to make sure that we're strengthening the communities we're in. We're not always right, but we want to be on offense. In Charlottesville, Virginia, we got word a number of years ago that we had people in far-right groups, members of hate groups, essentially, that were trying to book Airbnbs, and we prevented them. We did our very best to prevent them. We have an entire operation trying to prevent people that are part of groups that are classified as hate groups booking on Airbnb. What we saw with the Capitol raid was something that was shocking, and we felt like there were just too many reservations and too many people to screen and discern, what people's intentions were. And we thought the very best thing for safety that we could do, after having consulted the governors of Maryland, Virginia, the DC mayor, and the police borough, was that we should just not allow people to book Airbnb that week. I mean, obviously, we didn't want to contribute to any mayhem or violence. And so I feel like that was the right decision. It was frankly kind of an easy decision at the end of the day. I mean, you always have to side with health and safety.
Now, we can't ignore the biggest story of the day, which is what's happening with GameStop and Robinhood, and what seems to be a movement of the center of gravity from institutions to potentially the people. I'm curious how you're reading this. As a public company CEO, is this kind of volatility and unpredictability unnerving?
I've tried to tell our own employees, let me put it this way. Our company is now used to volatility after last year. I mean, there are very few companies had more volatility than Airbnb last year. And so I think that we're not going to be unnerved personally by volatility, because we're looking at the very long term. And I tell people, you focus on what you can control. Now, I do think it's a great thing that more people can be able to participate. That's kind of the whole idea of Airbnb, that more people are able to participate in hospitality. And one of the things we saw is a lot of people are participating as Airbnb shareholders. Now, as far as anything beyond that, probably best not for me to comment. Certainly, I'm not an expert in this matter. But I do think that, I got a lot of phone calls from people when we went public, people I hadn't heard of in a couple decades, people I went to high school with, teachers saying they purchased stock. And, I think I feel an immense responsibility to all of them. And I do think that, one of the benefits of having a great brand is a lot of people want to be a part of it and they want to own a piece of it. And that just means that, your responsibility is increased. I think that the responsibility of a CEO in America today is different than it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I think maybe a couple decades ago, very narrowly, most CEOs felt like their responsibility was solely and exclusively to shareholders. I don't think there's many large CEOs today that feel that way. I mean, the Business Roundtable, you had hundreds of CEOs sign up saying that they believe their responsibility is more than just to shareholders. Their responsibility is to other stakeholders. Of course it is. The best thing for shareholders is that society wants your company to exist in the future. That is the very best thing for shareholders. And that means the people have to be happy with your company. They're going to be evaluating you, the decisions you make, whether you ban reservations to see how you deal with some of the greatest ills of society. And I think the people are watching. And I think that we have to remember that our responsibility is to everyone.
So given that we are in a rapidly changing political and economic landscape, a new administration, vaccines on the way, what is your outlook on this year? If 2020 was the year of a pandemic and a recession and a torpedo, what's going to be the theme of 2021?
And are you asking about just the world, or are you asking for Airbnb? Because
the world, according to Brian Chesky.
Oh God, for Airbnb, it's going to be a year of focus, but for the world, it's going to be a year of hope and togetherness. That's what it's going to be. Some things. Think about what COVID did. COVID has probably accelerated many industries by 5 or 10 years. What it's really done is digitized a lot of things, right? So many things are now digital, and digitization, in a sense, is like acceleration of numerous industries. And so a whole bunch of things that were popular might go out of fashion. We can guess what's not coming back. I'm certain one thing is coming back: human connection. You can't keep people apart forever. People will be together again. And I think when we are together, we're going to realize that we maybe sometimes took each other for granted before when we were together, when we didn't have everyone. And so I think there's only so many social media connections, digital connections, and Zoom calls that you can do eventually to fulfill you. You need to have real in-person connection. And I think when we have that, we're going to have a better spirits, a lot more hope, a lot less division. I mean, this is the optimist in me. And I think the best thing to kind of help unify people is to help them walk in each other's shoes and help them be together again. That's the very best thing I can think of.
Brian, a lot of that stuff you talk about in your new report, which I urge folks to go check it out. We've got a new piece on it out at Bloomberg.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. What a year you have had, and really appreciate you sharing your learnings here with us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily.
All right. And with that, I told you we'd have a good closer. Thank you all for joining us for the last session of the Bloomberg Year Ahead Conference, and for all of the attention you've given us over the last few days. I also want to thank our sponsors, Alex Partners and IBM, for making this event possible. You can rewatch any of it on the website. All the recordings are going to be uploaded. We've also got our calendar of events for the year there. Just go to BloombergLive.com, and we hope you will join us again soon. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, anchor and executive producer of Bloomberg Technology. More on the year ahead. Bye.